What's up, everybody? Welcome to week 13 of R2 F2 Prognostication. I am your host, Robbie Russell. It may be playoff time for some of you guys. This may be the last week of the regular season for some of you guys. And some may even have one more week, and their playoffs may be for 15, 16, and 17. Regardless, a little bit of last week's recap. I called Zach Stacy a sleeper who was on his way to a great game before he got hurt, unfortunately. A touchdown, 82 or 87 yards on 12 carries against that Bears defense. But Cunningham came in and rushed for over 100 yards. Also called Anquan Bolden very nicely. Ray Rice on the bus side. Jared Boykin, Nate Burleson of the Lions. Welcome back, Nate. The Ravens and the Rams defense. But on the flip side now, I missed atrociously, if that's even a word, horribly, whatever. I missed bad on Aaron Dobson. Didn't even have a catch. Played 2 snaps in the entire second half. Eric Decker, who only had a catch for 5 yards. The Chiefs defense and Ben Tate, who was a complete running back bust against the Jaguars. For the second week in a row now, the Jags defense against the run have just made me look bad. And last but not least, Case Keenum I missed on badly last week. With that being said, let me get right to the quarterbacks. Josh McCown, who starts his 3rd straight game for the Bears this Sunday against the Minnesota Vikings in the Mall of America Dome. Now, McCown has been called upon this season through he's played in started 5 games. He's tallied 7 scores and only 1 interception, with that interception coming just last week against the St. Louis Rams. He's developed chemistry with Brandon Marshall, as you saw by Marshall's numbers last week. And that performance last week, he did throw for 352 yards against a decent St. Louis Rams defense. This week, the Minnesota Vikings, they've given up 10 passing touchdowns and only one interception over the last 5 games. And in that span, they're giving up an average of 26.4 points to opposing quarterbacks. Wow. If McCown's on your team and you don't have a heavy hitter like a Stafford, a Breeze, or a Peyton Manning or Newton, I really like Josh McCown to surprise. Now, Arizona's riding a nice 4-game winning streak. And I understand during this 4-game winning streak, they really haven't played anybody physically tough on defense. Or all around, for that matter. But a large part is due to the play of Carson Palmer. The last 2 games, Carson Palmer's accumulated 4 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions. And in those 2 games, he's thrown for 733 yards combined. This week, against the Eagles, I see Palmer staying hot. He's really gotten Michael Floyd involved. He's got the chemistry down, it seems now, with Fitzgerald. The Eagles' defense is worse against the pass, but on the downfall, they've only given up an average of 18.3 points to quarterbacks at home this season. Carson Palmer on the road averages 19.1 points this season. So hopefully he can squeak out 20. I like Palmer to throw for at least 300 yards and 2 scores at minimum come Sunday against the Philadelphia Eagles defense, who in part they're tough because they've intercepted the ball on defense 13 times compared to their 17 touchdowns. I also like E.J. Manuel, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Andy Dalton, as I mentioned, Cam Newton, the heavy hitters, and Tony Romo. Now, for you Nick Foles owners, I have good and bad news. The good news is Foles was named the starter for the rest of the season today, for here on out for the Eagles. The bad news is he's in for a rough matchup this week at home against the Arizona Cardinals. That Cardinals passing defense has only given up 3 300-yard passers on the season. Now, granted, one of those was Drew Brees. We all know Drew Brees is going to put up the yards. So, I mean, that's almost a given. But in the other two 300-yard games, the Cardinals defense have come up with a combined 7 interceptions. Wow. With only 1 passing touchdown. I don't see Foles really having a great game. I don't even think he touches 250 yards passing, to be completely honest. We know Patrick Peterson's going to be glued to Deshaun Jackson. So and for that reason, I mainly do not see Foles posting no more than 16 fantasy points. But hey, at least that cornerback wide receiver matchup of Peterson-Jackson will be entertaining to watch, to say the least. On to running backs. Now, last week, don't count it for a second, Dallas defense has at least 1 rushing touchdown given up in 3 straight games. Now bring that last week back in. Andre Brown didn't score, but he did manage to rip off 127 yards, and he averaged just around, I think it was just above 6 yards per carry. That 100-yard game by Andre Brown has made it 3 straight games that Dallas has given up for, or has let a running back rush for over the century mark against them. Also, the Cowboys have given up 17 points to 1 running back over the last 4 games, and on the season, they've given up the most points to running backs. Now, Oakland's coaches have stated Rashad Jennings is going to remain the ball carrier. He's hot. McFadden's coming back from injury. But why should Jennings not be ridden this week? 4 games, over his last 4 games since week 9, he's ran for 2 touchdowns. He's accumulated 2 100-yard games. And in all 4 games, he's totaled at least 105 yards. Now, unfortunately, time and time again, we see coaches say, oh, this guy's going to be eased back into the lineup. Oh, we're going to take it easy on him. And then come to the end of the game, you look at the box score, or if you're watching the game or whatever, you see McFadden have 20 carries. Rashad Jennings only has 6. What? So, I mean, we like I said, we see it time and time again. But with Jennings averaging just a skosh over 20.5 fantasy points since week 9, I really don't see Darren McFadden having that much of an effect. But hey, I had to throw the little teaser into you Rashad Jennings owners to play with your brain. Go with Jennings. If you own Eddie Lacy, Donald Brown against the Titans defense, he torched them 2 weeks ago. The Titans defense has given up an average of 23.2 points to the running back who receives the most carries over the last 5 games. Bilal Powell, I don't think Chris Ivory's going to play. He has an ankle sprain. Powell has only 1 game, though, over 50 yards this season. But it's largely in part because of Ivory eating his carries. Look at Powell's last 3 games. He's averaged at least 3.2 yards per carry. So if Ivory is out, Bilal Powell owners should start him. Also expect big games from Matt Forte, Jamal Charles, Adrian Peterson should go off against that Bears defense, and Reggie Bush. Flip it to the bus side real fast. In Week 7, Baltimore and Pittsburgh played. Tomorrow night, Baltimore and Pittsburgh play, but it's in Baltimore. This is a matchup that doesn't sit well with you Le'Veon Bell owners, unfortunately. First, the Ravens have only given up 1 100-yard rusher on the season. That came in Week 6. 6, with Eddie Lacy gaining 120 yards. But the next most rushing yards was Le'Veon Bell with 93 in that Week 7 matchup. Second, the Ravens have only been scored on 1 time on the ground and 2 times through the air to running backs. They've given up 3 total touchdowns to running backs on the season. It's pretty amazing seeing how the running backs get a lot of touches a game. Now, third, the Ravens are giving up an average of 13.3 points to running backs in their house. The Ravens defense shows up against the run in their house. And guess what? Only 1 of those 3 touchdowns have come in their house. I just look for other options for you Le'Veon Bell owners. Now, joining Bell on the bench needs to include, needs to be Bobby Rainey, D'Angelo Williams, and Jonathan Stewart, LaShawn McCoy in non-PPR leagues. Speaking of McCoy, the Cardinals, they've only given up one 100-yard rusher this year, and that was Frank Gore barely getting over it with 101 yards. So, McCoy's in the same boat as Le'Veon Bell. Chris Johnson, Alfred Morris, and Pierre Thomas. My first wide receiver sleeper is a bit of a reach. Could be my gamble this week. He may not even be on many rosters. He may not even be on no rosters in fantasy-wise. But if you're in a deep league where you have to start 3 wide receivers, or you have to start 3 wide receivers in a flex, if you have to go 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs in a flex, I'd take a look at Ace Sanders of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Ace Sanders and the Jags face off against Cleveland. It's in Cleveland. I know a lot of people are like, Jacksonville, really? Cleveland? Huh. But if you look deeper at the numbers, the Browns have given up 8 receiving scores to number 2 or 3 wide receivers this season. Also, in 7 games, number 2 or 3 wide receivers have led their teams in receiving. For example, week 6, it wasn't Calvin Johnson for the Lions, it was Chris Durham. Week 11, it was Mohamed Sanu that led the Bengals in receiving. There is a good chance Mike Brown may be back from injury, so he could possibly take away looks from Ace Sanders, but I still don't see Brown being effective. Also, Jared Boykin. He was targeted 9 times compared to James Jones's 6 targets when Matt Flynn entered the game for the Packers. Flynn gets to start tomorrow against that horrendous Lions defense, where Vincent Jackson should have cashed in last week, but instead it was Tyquan Underwood. Nonetheless, the Lions defense is just, like I said, horrendous. I like Boykin tomorrow. Also, I like Michael Floyd, Mike Wallace, Kendall Wright, Alshon Jeffrey, Nate Burleson, welcome back last week, Nate, Rod Streeter, Victor Cruz, who had over 100 yards receiving in both games against the Redskins last year, and Robert Woods of the Buffalo Bills, who comes back from an injury, and a refreshed Bills team that's coming off the bye week. The wide receivers that I don't like this week, let me just say, I don't see these guys having big games, but I understand they have to be started in some cases for you owners. But the list includes, as I mentioned earlier, Deshaun Jackson, Vincent Jackson, Andre Johnson, Torrey Smith, T.Y. Hilton, and Marquez Colston. Colston may be iffy. It depends who Sherman lines up against. If Sherman lines up against Graham, which would be the smartest option, it's going to be Graham that has the crappy night, and Colston could cash in pretty decent. But I still think Sherman plays on Colston a lot, so I don't like Colston. Tight ends, just like 2 weeks ago, I like Delaney Walker, who ripped the Colts. And along with Walker, I like Martellus Bennett, who's had a resurgence with McCown, Kobe Fleener, Rob Hausler, and look for Jordan Cameron to get back on track this week after 3 straight weeks of scoring below 10 points. Defenses, I know the Chiefs play the Broncos, the Seahawks play the Saints. So I like San Fran, Cleveland, the Giants, the Patriots, and the Cowboys. And that will do it for Week 13. Good luck, everybody. Regardless of your matchup, Have a happy Thanksgiving. I'm Robbie Russell, and I'll see you back here next week for 14.